The industry isn't whispering anymore. It's watching closely. Johnny Depp is standing at a rare crossroads where one film could quietly reset everything or confirm the doubts that have followed him for years. After courtroom headlines, paused projects, and cautious studios, 2026 isn't being framed as a comeback year by publicists, but as a test by insiders. Trade analysts have pointed to one upcoming project as a real measuring stick, not because of hype, but because of who's backing it, how it's being financed, and why studios are suddenly willing to take a calculated risk again. This isn't about sympathy or nostalgia. It's about whether audiences still show up when the lights go down and the name appears on screen. The pressure around this moment didn't appear overnight. It built quietly, project by project, meeting by meeting, while Johnny Depp stayed largely out of sight. Inside the industry, the conversation hasn't been emotional. It's been mathematical. Distributors are looking at attendance curves, international press alls, and how his name performs without franchise armor. One studio executive recently told a trade outlet that casting him again wasn't about redemption, it was about risk tolerance. That single sentence explains everything about where his career stands now. For years, Depp was treated as a guaranteed draw. His name alone once unlocked financing, overseas deals, and marketing confidence. But after the legal storm and the pause that followed, those assumptions were stripped away. When projects stalled or vanished, it wasn't because audiences made a final judgment. It was because studios didn't know how to read the room anymore. Executives hate uncertainty more than controversy, and Depp represented both at the same time. That's why the upcoming 2026 film matters so much. It isn't a loud franchise announcement or a nostalgia-driven sequel. It's a contained, performance-heavy project designed to test something very specific. Will audiences engage with Johnny Depp as an actor again, not as a headline? Insiders have described it as a temperature check film. Not designed to explode, but designed to reveal honest data. Modest budget. Controlled marketing. International appeal without relying on spectacle. This strategy didn't come from guesswork. It came from watching how other actors navigated similar industry freezes. In interviews with European press over the last 2 years, Depp himself has acknowledged that Hollywood doesn't forgive, it recalculates. He spoke openly about understanding why studios hesitated, saying trust in business isn't rebuilt through words but through results. That statement wasn't emotional. It was practical. And it aligned with how this film is being positioned. Casting directors involved in the project have said privately that the script was chosen specifically to avoid distraction. No exaggerated transformation. No larger-than-life persona. The goal is to put him on screen with nowhere to hide. If the performance connects, it becomes evidence. If it doesn't, excuses disappear. That's why people inside the industry are calling it a make-or-break moment, even if no one is saying that publicly. There's also a financial layer that makes this different from anything he's done recently. Instead of a traditional studio-led rollout, the film relies heavily on international pre-sales, especially in markets where Depp's appeal never fully collapsed. This isn't accidental. According to reports from Cannes and Berlin film markets, buyers were willing to commit on one condition: the final cut had to center on performance, not controversy. That clause alone shows how carefully calibrated this move is. Audience behavior plays a huge role here, and studios are watching it closely. They're not tracking social media arguments. They're tracking trailer completion rates, comment sentiment over time, and whether neutral viewers engage without being prompted by outrage or loyalty. Early teaser reactions, according to analytics firms quoted in trade reporting, show something interesting. Curiosity outweighs resistance. Not praise. Not backlash. Curiosity. And in this business, curiosity is oxygen. Depp's career challenges aren't about talent erosion. Even critics who distanced themselves during the controversy have consistently acknowledged his skill. The challenge is trust. Can audiences trust that the focus will stay on the story? Can studios trust that promotion won't be hijacked by old narratives? Can partners trust that the film won't become a liability instead of an asset? This one project is designed to answer all three questions at once. There's a reason you haven't seen him overselling it. No dramatic speeches. No victory laps. People close to the production say that restraint is intentional. One producer mentioned in an interview that the worst thing they could do is frame this as a comeback. Comebacks invite judgment. Performances invite evaluation. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything about how audiences approach the film. Another factor quietly working in his favor is time. Distance has softened extremes on both sides. Outrage cycles moved on. Loyalty cooled into patience. That emotional flattening allows something rare, a cleaner viewing experience. Viewers can sit down and watch without feeling like they're making a statement. For an actor trying to re-establish footing, that neutrality is powerful. Industry veterans remember similar moments. Films that weren't meant to dominate headlines but ended up redefining trajectories. Not through noise, but through numbers. If attendance holds steady after opening week. If international markets mirror domestic interest. If reviews focus on performance instead of context. Those metrics don't just affect Depp. They influence how studios approach risk with any actor who's fallen out of favor. The irony is that success here doesn't require overwhelming applause. It requires consistency. A solid opening. Stable word of mouth. No sudden drops. That's it. That's the bar. And that's why people inside Hollywood are paying attention. Because if this works, it quietly rewrites a rule the industry has followed for years, that controversy permanently eclipses craft. By the time the credits roll on this film, the decision won't be emotional. It will be logistical. More scripts sent. More meetings taken. More doors cracked open instead of shut. If it fails, the silence will be just as telling. Fewer calls. Fewer risks. Not punishment. Just probability adjusting itself. This is why 2026 isn't being hyped as a return. It's being treated as a reading. A scan. A real-time answer to a question studios have avoided asking directly. Can Johnny Depp still carry a film when the noise fades and only the screen remains? What makes this situation more complicated is that the industry isn't only judging the film, it's judging the reaction to the film. Insiders have explained that opening weekend numbers matter less than week 2 stability. That's where trust shows up. Anyone can generate curiosity once. Sustaining interest is what signals confidence. This is why distribution partners are already preparing multiple rollout scenarios instead of locking into one aggressive plan. Flexibility is the strategy, not optimism. There's also a creative reason this project carries weight. People familiar with the script have said it mirrors parts of Depp's own professional isolation without ever referencing real events. That choice was deliberate. It allows audiences to draw emotional parallels without being pushed toward a conclusion. In a past interview with a European magazine, Depp talked about gravitating toward stories that explore silence, exile, and internal reckoning. That quote is now being quietly reused by analysts because it aligns closely with the role he's taken on. Casting him wasn't unanimous at first. That's been confirmed by more than one producer speaking off record. Some argued the timing was still too close. Others believed waiting longer would only freeze momentum further. The compromise was control. Smaller scale. Tighter narrative. Fewer external variables. When a project is built like that, the performance becomes the data point, not the press cycle. Another element shaping expectations is how critics are likely to approach it. Several film journalists have already signaled, through panel discussions and festival conversations, that they're more interested in evaluating craft than revisiting history. Not out of kindness, but fatigue. Controversy-driven critique has diminishing returns. A film that forces critics to talk about acting, pacing, and tone instead of context changes the entire review environment. Audience psychology is also different now than it was during the height of the noise. Viewers have become more selective, less reactive. They don't rush to defend or condemn as quickly. That shift benefits a film that isn't trying to provoke. It just needs to hold attention. Early private screenings reportedly emphasized this point, with feedback focusing on quiet intensity rather than spectacle. Financial analysts following the project have noted that its break-even point is intentionally conservative. That means it doesn't need to dominate to succeed. It needs to perform steadily. That alone tells you how carefully this move has been engineered. No one involved is chasing headlines. They're chasing a signal that says, this is viable again. Depp himself has avoided framing this as anything symbolic. In one recent interview, he said he doesn't see films as verdicts, only as work. That statement might sound simple, but in an industry obsessed with narrative, it's a refusal to participate in the drama. And the refusal is part of why some decision-makers are watching closely. Restraint reads as professionalism. As 2026 approaches, the real tension isn't public. It's private. Agents are waiting. Financiers are watching spreadsheets. Casting conversations are being penciled, not inked. Everything depends on how this one performance lands when stripped of noise and judged in isolation. And that's the quiet truth behind the headline. This isn't about reclaiming a throne or proving anyone wrong. It's about answering a single, unemotional question the industry cares about more than anything else. Does the work still move people enough to justify the risk? There's another layer that rarely gets discussed publicly, but it matters just as much as box office numbers. Reputation inside production circles doesn't reset when headlines fade. Crews remember what it's like to work on a set. Producers remember whether a shoot stayed on schedule. Insurers remember risk profiles. According to a completion bond representative quoted in a trade interview last year, actors coming back from turbulence are evaluated less on public opinion and more on predictability. This film was structured to answer the concern quietly, without announcements. Sources close to the production have said the shoot itself was intentionally low drama. Tight schedule. Limited locations. No unnecessary delays. Those details don't trend online, but they travel fast inside the business. When line producers start reporting smooth operations, that information spreads faster than any press release. For an actor trying to stabilize his standing, that may be as important as performance. Another reason this project is being watched so closely is because it sits at an intersection Hollywood is still figuring out. Streaming hasn't replaced theatrical trust, but it has changed expectations. Studios no longer need explosive openings to justify follow-up work. They need reliability across platforms. This film's distribution plan reflects that reality. Theatrical presence to establish legitimacy, followed by controlled digital rollout to extend lifespan. Not flashy. Strategic. Johnny Depp's career challenges have always been exaggerated into extremes. Either untouchable star or industry exile. The reality has always been more nuanced. Even during the most difficult years, he continued working internationally. European directors never stopped seeing him as an actor first. That distinction matters because it preserved something crucial: professional muscle memory. He didn't disappear into inactivity. He just shifted terrain. In a French television interview, Depp once said that acting outside Hollywood reminded him why he started in the first place. That quote has resurfaced not as nostalgia, but as context. This upcoming film is seen by some insiders as a bridge between those worlds. A performance-driven piece that borrows the restraint of his European work and places it back into a global commercial framework. Audiences may not consciously track that evolution, but they feel it. Performances shaped by constraint often read as more grounded, less performative, more present. That's why early feedback from test audiences reportedly highlighted stillness rather than flamboyance. In an era of constant noise, stillness can be disarming. There's also a generational factor at play. Younger viewers don't carry the same emotional baggage older audiences do. Their relationship with Depp is less defined by tabloid cycles and more by clips, performances, and reputation fragments. For them, this film isn't a referendum. It's an introduction. Studios understand this, which is why marketing materials are being tailored differently across age brackets. Industry talk suggests that if this film meets expectations, it won't immediately lead to a flood of offers. Instead, it will unlock something slower and more sustainable. Supporting roles in ensemble projects. Character-driven scripts that don't rely on star power alone. Gradual renormalization. That path may not satisfy people looking for dramatic validation, but it's the path studios actually trust. The alternative outcome is quieter but just as definitive. If the film underperforms without clear external factors to blame, the industry won't react with outrage or punishment. It will simply adjust assumptions. Fewer risks. Fewer chances. Not because of emotion, but because resources follow patterns. That's the part most audiences never see. Careers don't usually end with a bang. They fade through recalculation. This is why language around this project has been so careful. No one involved is using words like redemption or return. Those words create expectations that numbers can't always satisfy. Instead, they talk about collaboration, story, and execution. Boring words. Professional words. The kind that signal seriousness to people who control budgets. There's a quiet confidence in choosing to be evaluated this way. No defensive posture. No public score settling. Just work placed in front of an audience and allowed to stand or fall on its own. That approach doesn't guarantee success, but it maximizes credibility. And credibility is the currency Depp is actually trying to rebuild. As the release window draws closer, the silence around the film is almost louder than hype would be. No forced virality. No manufactured controversy. Just anticipation building in controlled spaces. trade newsletters, private screenings, distribution meetings. That's where careers are actually decided. By the time part 1 of this story closes, nothing will be declared publicly. There won't be a single headline that definitively answers whether this film saved or ended anything. Instead, signals will accumulate quietly. Calls returned faster. Meetings scheduled instead of postponed. Interest expressed without conditions. Those are the signs insiders are watching for. And that's where this chapter pauses. Not on a verdict, but on a moment of balance. A career suspended between caution and possibility, waiting for audiences to do the one thing that matters more than any argument ever could. Watch, and decide for themselves. What often gets overlooked in discussions about Johnny Depp is how early careers actually hinge on a single artistic decision. Yet in this case, multiple people inside the business have independently described this project as a hinge point, not because it carries spectacle, but because it carries consensus. When financiers, distributors, and creatives all agree to watch the same outcome, it becomes a reference point. And reference points shape futures more than opinions ever do. This is why the film's creative restraint matters. There are no franchise expectations to hide behind, no visual access to distract from narrative weight. Every scene leans on presence. Pacing is deliberate. Dialogue is sparse where it needs to be. That choice aligns with comments Depp made in a past Q&A with the European Film Council, where he spoke about trusting silence more than exposition. That philosophy isn't theoretical here. It's operational. Inside casting offices, there's a phrase that's been quietly used in relation to this release. Proof of life. Not in a literal sense, but professionally. Proof that momentum can exist without controversy as fuel. Proof that a project can move forward without defensive framing. Proof that collaborators can talk about work instead of context. If this film delivers that, even modestly, it alters the baseline assumptions that have followed him. There's also an emotional economy at play. Audiences don't like being told how to feel. They resist instruction. This project avoids the trap by not asking for forgiveness or validation. It simply offers a story and steps back. That distance gives viewers room to engage honestly. And honest engagement, even when mixed, is more valuable than polarized reaction. Trade journalists who've tracked Depp's career arc have pointed out that his most durable performances were never tied to consensus approval. They were tied to specificity. Characters that felt lived in rather than designed to impress. This role reportedly returns to that instinct. Less external flourish. More internal logic. That alone has sparked curiosity among critics who once championed his work for those exact reasons. Marketing strategy reflects this mindset as well. Early materials focus on tone and atmosphere rather than star power. His name appears, but it isn't leaned on. That's a calculated decision. It signals confidence in the material rather than reliance on legacy. And to an industry allergic to desperation, that signal matters. As release approaches, the conversation will inevitably grow louder. Think pieces will surface. Comparisons will be drawn. Narratives will try to form. But beneath all of that, the real evaluation will stay quiet. It will happen in spreadsheets, in follow-up emails, in meetings that either happen or don't. That's where careers are actually redirected. For Johnny Depp, this moment isn't about rewriting the past. It's about establishing a present that can support a future. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just credibly. And credibility, once restored even partially, has a way of compounding. The audience may never see that machinery turning. They'll just see a film. A performance. 90 or so minutes of story. But what happens in those minutes will echo far beyond the screen, because it answers a question the industry has been quietly holding on to for years, waiting for the right data to release it. That echo is why so many people are holding their breath without saying it out loud. The industry doesn't need a miracle here. It needs clarity. Ambiguity is expensive. Uncertainty freezes pipelines. One clean data point can unlock movement across multiple layers, from casting confidence to insurance approvals. That's why this film is being treated less like an event and more like an experiment. What makes experiments uncomfortable is that they don't guarantee outcomes. They only reveal truths. And that's exactly what this project is positioned to do. Reveal whether audience interest is passive or active. Reveal whether criticism engages with the work or circles back to old narratives. Reveal whether time has actually done what people assume it does. There's a quiet discipline in how this moment has been handled. No emotional appeals. No framing of victimhood. No attempts to control interpretation. In an era where over-explanation often backfires, Restraint becomes a signal of confidence. Insiders recognize that. It reads as someone willing to be judged on output alone. Audience behavior over the last few years supports this approach. Viewers are more skeptical of messaging and more responsive to authenticity. They don't reward loud insistence. They reward coherence. A film that knows what it is and doesn't ask permission to exist stands a better chance of being met on its own terms. This is also why comparisons to past highs are irrelevant here. No one involved expects this to recreate blockbuster-era numbers. That isn't the benchmark. The benchmark is sustainability. Can a film perform steadily without collapsing under discourse? Can it live beyond opening weekend? Can it exist without becoming a proxy battle for opinions unrelated to the story? If the answer is even partially yes, the implications ripple outward. It suggests that careers can move forward without full consensus. That trust doesn't require universal approval, only sufficient confidence. That audiences are capable of separating work from noise when given the space to do so. And if the answer is no, the conclusion will be just as clear. Not dramatic. Not punitive. Simply informative. A signal that the recalibration has reached its limit. Either way, the uncertainty ends. And in this business, endings to uncertainty are valuable, even when they aren't celebratory. This is why the film matters beyond its runtime. It functions as a measuring tool for how modern Hollywood processes risk, memory, and audience agency. Not in theory, but in practice. And those practices evolve only when tested. As this chapter moves toward its release window, the balance remains delicate. Expectation without hype. Scrutiny without spectacle. Attention without noise. It's a narrow path, but it's intentional. And it reflects a broader shift in how the industry decides what comes next. The screen will light up. The story will unfold. And quietly, without declarations or dramatic conclusions, a set of decisions will begin to realign. Not because of what people argue about online, but because of what the numbers, the reactions, and the silence in between reveal. That silence between reactions is often where the most honest answers live. When applause fades quickly or outrage burns out, what remains is behavior. Did people recommend the film without being asked? Did they rewatch scenes? Did discussion shift from headlines to moments? Those patterns don't trend instantly, but platforms and studios track them with precision. They're looking for organic engagement, not forced loyalty. One executive described this phase as the long-tail test. Anyone can provoke a spike. Very few projects sustain attention without constant stimulation. If this film holds its ground weeks after release, even modestly, it sends a message that interest isn't dependent on controversy. That distinction is critical. It separates spectacle from substance. It also reshapes how risk is calculated going forward. Not just for Depp, but for any actor whose career has been interrupted by external factors. If audiences demonstrate they can engage without being prompted by extremes, studios gain confidence in a more nuanced approach to casting. That's why this single release is being quietly discussed in broader industry terms. It's not just about one name. It's about testing a model. There's a human element beneath all of this that rarely gets acknowledged. Actors don't operate in isolation. Their viability affects writers, directors, crews, and investors. When one career enters a gray zone, dozens of others orbiting it feel the impact. Clarity restores movement. Even a restrained yes is more productive than an indefinite maybe. The final stretch before release is often the most revealing. Not because of trailers or press, but because of how little changes. When a campaign stays consistent, it suggests confidence in the plan. No last-minute pivots. No panic adjustments. That steadiness is intentional here. It signals that the people behind the film are prepared to accept whatever data comes back. And that acceptance is rare. Most projects try to shape interpretation before audiences ever sit down. This one doesn't. It offers a story and waits. That patience isn't passive. It's calculated. It trusts that the work can speak without amplification. As part one of this narrative settles, the stakes are clear even if the outcome isn't. A career defined by extremes has arrived at a moment defined by restraint. No grand declarations. No forced conclusions. Just a film placed into the world to see what still connects. From here, everything that follows depends on one simple action repeated thousands of times. People choosing to watch. Not to argue. Not to defend. Not to condemn. Just to engage. And in an industry built on attention, that choice carries more weight than any headline ever could. If you're still here, you're already doing what actually matters. You're paying attention instead of reacting. Now I want to know your take, not in extremes, not in slogans. Do you believe audiences today can separate performance from noise, or has the industry permanently changed how careers recover? Drop your honest perspective in the comments, even if it's conflicted. If this kind of grounded, real industry storytelling adds value for you, stay connected, because the next chapter depends on how these conversations evolve when the film finally meets its audience.